right, let's go. Today, I'm doing my book review finally of Austin Kleon's Show Your Work. I've read it twice. I think it's a great book, but we've got a fair bit to talk about. Let's get into it. All right, so we're talking about this book because of Ali Abdaal. He said a number of times that he loves the book and he gives it to any of his friends when they're stuck regarding their creative endeavors. But what are its stats? Well, go have a look at Amazon and a simple Google will tell you that this is getting 4.6 out of 5 stars from 9,700 odd reviews. So once you remove those crappy spam reviews where people are like, man, I didn't get the book for like 2 weeks, 1 star. Or man, it had a creased page when it showed up in the post, 1 star. I think we're talking about a book that's 4.8, 4.9 stars. So it's pretty highly reviewed. It was released in 2014 and actually kind of surprised that it was that old. It was a little bit of a shock. It's still a top 10 seller in a number of its subcategories. And of course, Ali's recommended it, and that's why we're reading it. Now, I've been following Austin on Insta, and I'd written up my notes, my review of this book, before I got this tweet from him. Just about a week ago, he said, "It's the 10th anniversary of this little book. So delighted that it's still speaking to people. Thanks to everyone who read it and shared it." And I thought, here's a guy that wrote this book and he's just really humble. You know, Austin could probably do with reading a book called Show Your Work and do with a little bit of self-promotion. He's just a really humble guy. And I really like that about him. If you follow him on Insta, it's a gold little account. So I recommend you go and have a look at that. So that's its stats on Amazon. It's pretty highly reviewed. I am going to use the 3-point scale, the special dusty 3-point scale. Number 1, wasn't for me. You know, I'm going to put it back in the street library or I'm going to return it to an op shop. Number 2, it's a keeper. I'm going to put it back on my bookshelf and I'm going to reread this book. Number 3, and my highest recommendation, it's a keeper and I'm going to recommend it to a friend. In fact, I'm going to try and force this book on a friend. Now, I approached this book with a really positive mindset. It's physically small and it appears like it was going to be really easy to read. I read the book in a couple of days and I really enjoyed it. I was going to review this as a nice little entree to more serious books like Atomic Habits, but I didn't take any notes. And so after reading about 4 or 5 other self-improvement books, I had to go back and reread it and highlight it and draw in it and put my little sticky notes throughout the book. And I'm so stoked that I had to go back and reread this book because rereading it about 6 weeks later really changed my perception about this book. So we got 2 lessons that came out of that. Number 1, always mark up your book. And number 2, there's way more meat on the bone in this book than I originally thought. Now, I'm really going to encourage you to slow down, read it slowly, and drink it in. So I'm not going to bore you with minute details of the book. I'm just going to, try and communicate some of the highlights to me. What I really found my overview of this book is that there's almost an entire 300 to 400 page self-improvement book within this little book. Now, Austin hasn't tried to stretch this thing out over 300 pages. It's got lots of big headings throughout it and pages that only have a couple of words on it. It's 200 odd pages, so you could get through this in a night, no problem if you wanted, but I really think this is worth spending probably 5 nights. Go over it slowly. There's a way more in this book than what you might perceive. Okay, let's have a look at my chapter highlights. Here we go. Okay, right up the front, Austin says, it's a book for people who hate the very idea of self-promotion, an alternative, if you will, to self-promotion. I kind of agree with that. It's really encouraging. So Austin talks about the idea of a scenus. He calls it a scenus, which is basically grabbing hold of the network effect and gathering like-minded people around you. We live in an age where it's easier than ever to join a scenus. That's a really good section. He talks about being one step ahead of those that you're trying to teach. The best way to get started on the path to sharing your work is to think about what you want to learn and making a commitment to learning it in front of others. That's gold. You can't find your voice if you don't use it. I could not agree more. So true. When I was thinking about how my videos might look originally, I imagined them as like a Mr. Beast kind of high impact cut. But when I got into doing my first few videos, what I really wanted was to just sit in front of the camera and just talk to you. So he talks about this concept of one day you'll be dead, read obituaries. And this struck me pretty hard, but I've got to be honest, I thought that James Clear really belted me around the head with talking about this concept with one day you'll be dead in Atomic Habits. But it was pretty cool to see it show up here. All right, he talks about thinking processes, not product. And this just immediately took me to one of my heroes, Ali Abdaal. So the most interesting thing about Ali Abdaal is not his excellent recent book, Feel Good Productivity. It's the years of process and behind the scenes and information sharing. I just love all those behind the scenes stuff with Ali, particularly those videos where he's just been so open year after year after year with monetization and how he's going. There's a great section, open up your cabinet of curiosities. Really, you need to read this yourself, okay? But he's talking about not being boring and storytelling structures. It's an excellent section. So there's a concept that you see a lot with self-improvement videos at the moment. He says, he talks about teach what you know. Share your trade secrets. And one of my favorite creators, Dan Coe, he does this best. And remember, this was written before 2014. Another great section is you want hearts, not eyeballs. So followers versus quality is a strong topic. He's got this concept, identify your fellow knuckleballers. So community building, that could be school, it could be Kajabi. He's also got some really cool advice on, the haters, the trolls, negative people in your comments. It's called Don't Feed the Trolls, and that's a pretty cool section. So he's got a section on what he calls selling out, which is monetization. And so that's a hot topic. You can find thousands upon thousands of videos on monetization on YouTube at the moment. And my two favorites are obviously Dan and Ali. Look, I'm just getting started on my journey, but there's a really good section on sticking around, i.e. not burning out on YouTube. You can see so many creators that have burned out over time. So there's a really good thing. Okay, so I had very few negatives about this book. Probably the only thing that I didn't like where it showed its age was some of the quotes that Austin uses to keep the book moving and maybe introduce a little bit of authenticity. I don't actually think that he needed to use quotes from anyone famous. He's an authority. As soon as I started reading the book, I trusted him. Austin, maybe you could update some of the quotes. Maybe we could get a few quotes from Scissor or Ice Spice. I don't even know who they are, but anyway. Okay, so what I found was that Austin Kleon, this is a fantastic little book. Really incredibly skillfully, he has distilled information. He's synthesized information down to easily digestible chunks. And at first glance, I thought this book was a little bit, well, not superficial, but, maybe like an entree to some of the more serious books. But having read some of the more kind of serious books, I now see the incredible value in this book and how well distilled the information is. It's a fantastic little book. And he hasn't stretched it out over 300 pages. It's an easy read. And let's not let that mislead us into thinking that it's a simple book, because it's not. It's much, much better than that. I think that you've just got to trust that short and sweet does not equal twee. Not at all. In fact, it can be very profound. Now, I found that watching one of Hormozi's presentations where he's giving like one of those hour-long presentations live, and he's walking around on stage with a mic strapped on him, and he's just kind of semi-freestyling it. He talks about the value of an older book in that it may in fact be more valuable because that author is not trying to sell to you, they're trying to teach. And that was the moment that I started to love Hormozi. I was like, wow, I love that. So this was released in 2014, so Austin obviously wrote it pre that. It's a pretty old book, but wow, does it stand the test of time. Apart from the quotes from a bunch of really old people, old people, who you're not going to care about and not going to Google. If I couldn't be bothered, I'm sure you won't. This book could have been released yesterday. It's a great little book. So, where do we stand with my rating? Are we going to give this to the op shop? Are we going to pop it into the bookshelf and reread it later? Or are we going to pop it into the bookshelf and recommend it, try and press it on a friend? I've got to be honest. First time around, it was an instant pop it in the bookshelf and I'll reread it later. Had to reread it 6 weeks later to make notes for this review. And I found it had just increased its value so much after reading some other books. So for me, it's drifting towards, well, it's almost definitely a keep and a recommend to my mates. Yeah, it's a great book. Look, 4.6 out of 5 from, almost 10,000 reviews, can't be wrong. And we know that there's a bunch of spam reviews in there. So, look, I'd hate to start off my first book review with saying, you should go and buy it. But, yeah, you should probably go and buy it, all right? All right, ups.